right. Well, good afternoon, good morning, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Really excited to have with me at the 2024 Signals RevTech Conference. We've got two great individuals I'm excited to spend some time with. We've got Jake Rennie, co-founder of Revenue Reimagined. And then we have McKay Allen, who is the CMO over at Connect. So welcome, guys. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Steve.
Let's take just a minute, introduce yourselves, and we'll start there.
Awesome. I'll get started. My name is McKay Allen. I'm the CMO at Connect. Glad to be here. Steve and I worked together many moons ago at Avanti and hosted a short-lived and unsuccessful podcast together for a while that we had some fun with. Been at a number of different software companies, SaaS companies, marketplace SaaS as well, and excited for the discussion today.
Yeah. Jake,
Awesome.
Tell us a little about yourself.
Jake Rennie. I am Chief Growth Officer and co-founder over at Revenue Reimagined. Been in the startup scene for years and years and years, and been a part of different startups of different sizes, scaling from 0 to the first 5 and 250 million plus and so on. And just thrilled now to be at a stage where I'm actually in a fractional CRO practice where I help other founders and startups scale their go-to-market practices.
Well, great. Well, excited to have you both here. Kind of the purpose of our discussion today is I'll never forget when I got into software sales, and someone pulled me aside and said, "Hey, those marketing guys over there, they're no good. They're going to pass you a bunch of garbage. Just go ahead and ignore them." And then fast forward a few years later, I found myself on the other side of that coin as part of the marketing team, and sitting in meetings with marketing, going, "Oh, those sales guys, they are good for nothing. They don't want to. We sell them over perfectly good leads, and they want to be cashiers more than they want to be salespeople." And there's been this traditional this butting heads between the two teams, we kind of want to talk that through, and why is that, and kind of what have we seen in the past, and how do we shift that going forward? I think is kind of the crux of this conversation here. So let's just a little quick around the horn. What have you guys seen? What are the horror stories that you guys have seen in the past? My personal favorite was when I had a CMO tell a sales leader to stop being a jerk, but he didn't use that language when he called him out. So, Jake, you had something you wanted to add.
Well, I was just gonna say, actually, something you were saying as you were leading into it kind of made me laugh because, I had like this like penitent moment in my career, similar to like you were talking about, where for the first time I took on as head of revenue, I took on a marketing organization, and all of a sudden I just like the lights went on, and there was this realization of like, this is way harder than I ever imagined, and I've been going about it this whole time the completely wrong way, and it changed my perspective on the whole alignment and like the relationship that marketing and sales need to have. So it's, when you say that, it's funny, like you almost have to like get thrown in the trenches on both sides to realize like, wow, we need each other way more than we think.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, I totally agree, Jake. Like it's interesting when you and the SDR team actually in many SaaS organizations and software organizations is kind of like straddling that line, right? Like sometimes they report to marketing, sometimes to sales. Actually don't have like a super strong opinion about where it belongs personally, but it's kind of the group that is in the middle. But the thing that you mentioned, horror stories, Steve, like there were many instances in previous roles where it's a cycle of, okay, if sales isn't hitting their number, the marketing team is the second place that is blamed when they should probably share equal blame with the sales team. Like I think too many marketers go into it and think, oh, this is a sales number, when in reality it should be shared by the entire revenue organization, regardless of how the organization is set up. And I think that when that sort of shared mentality does not exist is when you have problems. So, I mean, gosh, and you were probably in some of these meetings in the past, Steve, where it was literally like, okay, these leads are garbage. No, they're not. Your team doesn't know how to do a demo. Like and I think some of it too is proper expectations. Like as a marketer, I think too many marketers start new roles or maybe work with a new sales leader and um, don't set proper expectations with what marketing leads are and aren't. And marketing leaders are probably setting the wrong expectations almost on purpose sometimes. Like they want to sell themselves and explain why marketing will solve all the world's problems, when in reality, it doesn't. And I think marketing needs to be more honest about that with their sales counterparts. Like, look, this isn't going to solve everything. And probably with the CEO of the company they're at, like, this is not going to solve everything, right? If a market doesn't exist for a product or whatever, marketing can't solve some of those things. So I do think there's an expectation game here as well that has to be really, really carefully explained by the marketer and not oversold, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that, they need to make sure they're aligned. And having run business development teams in the past, I kind of felt like saying, "Hey, mom and dad, like, can't you get along and stop fighting between the two groups?" But also something that we touched on before was, I think the worst thing I could do as a business development leader would be, I would show up to these sales and marketing leadership meetings, and I would sit there and celebrate and tout how great my team is and how it's doing.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, sales completely missed their number. And so you said it, Jake, really well, where you said it really sucks to celebrate when you're all alone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You guys got me thinking about, I won't mention the organization, but I worked at a pretty large organization, well-known brand. And there was this like odd culture where people like team heads would spend more time preparing the slides and like the appendix slides to point fingers and prove their point than they would actually like the core meat of the presentation that we would have for like our QBRs or monthly meetings. And it was always a surprise to me. I had a counterpart over there, a sales leader who would literally like spend 2 weeks meeting up with the RevOps team to dig into all the data points and fabricate a storyline to take control of the narrative to bury the marketing organization. And it, like, I remember one day when I kind of realized the amount of time that he was spending, the effort, and the end goal that he had, I just thought to myself, what a flipping waste of time. Like, why are we going to all sit together in an office in an expensive meeting so that we can point fingers and throw fits? Like, what is our end goal? What are we trying to accomplish here, right? And in that same company, I got to a point where I kind of got distracted by it for a little bit. And I remember I was leading North America sales and for a large product line, and got into a conversation with a field VP of sales, and I was doing inside sales development mainly, and we were creating pipeline, and this VP of sales was like just ripping me, like, we're not hitting our number, you guys aren't doing your job, you're not providing the pipeline. And I remember saying to him at that moment, it felt like the right thing to say. It was like, well, look, my org hit our number, like we're at 215%. It's like, what, like, you guys got to figure your stuff out, we've got ours. And like when it came out, it felt wrong. I just couldn't figure out why. And then all of a sudden this realization of like when the call was ended, I had this moment, I was by myself thinking, dude, sucks to win alone. Like, what's the whole point of our goals being set the way they are if we're at 250% and my counterpart, who really is like driving revenue in the business, is sitting at 75? Like, something's off. And it just shifted the way I wanted to work together with my partners internally. Because there was no sense in celebrating what we were accomplishing if the business wasn't winning.
You're 100% right, Jake. Like, I think, and I'm not trying to be like critical of my own kind, us marketers, right? But like, marketers sometimes track metrics that are actually totally inconsequential to business success. Like, marketers cannot celebrate a great quarter when they launched a new page on the website or whatever, and then, or even when you hit a demo number. right, or an opportunity number if sales didn't hit their number. There's just no alignment sometimes between what each organization is tracking. And I do think it's important, particularly for marketers, and probably, to a lesser degree in the SDR orgs, like if there are things that you're doing that aren't directly driving revenue, it becomes really challenging to argue to keep those things, to do those things, right? And because it just becomes an exercise in like vanity at that point. Like, why are we
Right.
doing? And but I'm with you, Jake. Like, I've seen those meetings as well where, one group did well, one group didn't, and suddenly it becomes very territorial. And you mentioned the narrative being created. I've been in those meetings too, where you have people are spending more time creating slides that make the argument for their org than they are about like just trying to solve the problems.
The problem.
It's crazy.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know why
Well,
people do that? Like, you make the point about narratives. People do that because they're worried if the narrative in the organization gets formed that their team is the problem, that they're going to lose their job. Like, it's that simple. And I've seen that, and I'm sure you guys have too, where suddenly the louder voice in the room, the person who brought the most slides, has the CEO's ear for the next 2 years, and eventually, like, the other person gets fired. Like, I've seen that. And so there has to be, I think, responsible leadership in the C-suite as well, with like not just allowing narratives to drive the day and drive decision making as well.
Yeah.
So I think you bring up, you guys are touching on a great point. One, I love that we've all had this, like, individually we've had these awakening moments where we're like, oh yeah, maybe the way we were doing things, and that was a great line that I just dropped there in that meeting. I really got him, but did that really push us forward? I think mine was the line, hey, well, are your sales guys cashiers or are they salespeople? That won me tons of friends. But what are those obstacles? I think some of it is that, kind of the executive buy-in, that everybody's together. But what are those obstacles that are preventing the sales and marketing orgs to really working to, as one cohesive unit?
I have a thought here. McKay, you touched on something earlier. And I think you kind of massaged that thought for a second, but really, like, why does this happen? Well, for a lot of reasons, like there's a fear of it being pointed back at our organization, whatever it is. But if you boil it down, I think a lot of it's rooted in fear, right? Like we've all seen teams, businesses, startups, or big companies make decisions based on fear. And I think I know I can confidently say that anytime I was a part of an exercise or observed the exercise occurring where the end result was based on being fueled by fear, it never resulted in the outcome that anyone desired, one side or the other. And so I think fear is a very, very, very nasty fuel for a lot of us in the business space. Like it clouds our judgment. It becomes very egocentric, and there's a lot of concern there. So that gets in the way. But what we really, if I'm going to get to the core of it, to diagnose why, it's because we're not coming together and actually having the conversation of, okay, what matters most. And I have to give credit to a phenomenal mentor of mine, Mark Roberge, who was an investor at a startup that I was in and spent time with me to really understand every organization has the ability to identify what are the leading indicators that end in success for that organization, ultimately leading to revenue. We just need to spend the time to figure out what those are. And if we all set the same revenue goal, then we can diagnose in marketing what are our leading indicators, and then for sales and for customer success. And if we go through that exercise together towards that end goal of revenue, then I think we tear down all the walls. But I think the biggest obstacle, to your point, is we're not having those conversations together in the same room. We're having them in complete different silos, and then coming together and then having this emotional debate of, well, my goal is more important than your goal.
That's a great.
Mickey,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Mickey, what obstacles? And what have you seen? Because that is a great point. But what have you seen?
Yeah, I think alignment on the goal, and then over rotation towards, and this will sound like blasphemy to many, but over rotation towards hyper attribution. And I think that the marketing and sales world, at the sort of outset of you know, everything from email automation systems to, you know, your tools like Insight Squared and a lot of those attribution tools. I almost feel like revenue organizations over rotated to like everything attribution always. Everything has to be married to a team. And so I'll tell you a story. When I started at Connect, we have a very robust like partnership team. And they do a lot of partnerships and integrations and marketing activities with those partners. And so the first 4 months was literally me and the head of that department fighting with each other over who got credit for deals when they were brought by a partner, but marketing helped them market, or marketing hosted the webinar that the partner spoke on, right? And so we finally got in a room and we're like, this is not sustainable. We're just going to go to the CEO and say, here's the deal. We're no longer going to fight about this. Revenue is revenue. And marketing and this business development team both had a significant hand in this account coming through. And we're not going to fight about it anymore. So that's the deal. And the CEO was like, cool, I didn't want to referee a fight. So that's great. But it's the most healthy like revenue org I've ever seen, because we just like consciously made a decision early on that we're going to, of course, attribute what activities work and which don't. But we're not going to say, well, this deal was sourced by this group and this deal was not. Because in reality, in a modern multi-touch world, every deal is touched by multiple marketing activities, multiple partner activities, and multiple interactions with a sales rep or a team of sales individuals. So like, it's just a fool's errand. And I think one of the big obstacles that I've seen in the past is I have been in more meetings than I care to remember, where you're trying to get so granular with who sourced what deal and where did the deal come from that you're like, what are we even talking about anymore? And it becomes like this futile exercise of finger pointing. So I think that's a huge obstacle, is over rotation towards attribution.
And with, I mean, you both mentioned KPIs and aligning KPIs. I think the question that we need to ask is, so what? We're measuring this KPI, we're measuring attribution, we're measuring these things. So what? For to what end? Why are we doing it? Right.
I had to, like, just a quick thought there. I had to come to this realization. It's like, it's a means to an end, but the attribution is not an end all be all, right? Like, just because it came from this channel, it doesn't actually tell us the whole journey that lead actually went through to get into the actual sales funnel, right? How many events did they attend? How many webinars did they attend? How many white papers did they download? And then finally the SDR hit them up at the right time in the right place and converted that lead into a meeting. What does it matter? We were able to do what we were actually supposed to do, and that was run a beautifully orchestrated campaign to get the person into the pipe.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we get misaligned? How do we end up that way to begin with? And Jake, I think there's some thoughts you've had about that a little bit in terms of where goals and things come from. But more importantly, and I think the purpose of this conversation is, and then how do we fix it?
Yeah.
So,
you know, I think a lot of it comes from a way that things have always been done, and not being like, and not challenging the notion that like a top-down revenue goal is the only way for us to come up with a direction, or like kind of a North Star of revenue in the business. And what I mean by that is, like, oftentimes, especially in you know, venture-backed businesses or private equity-backed businesses, it's like there's a board who says, this is where we got to go, right? They're probably driven by, well, we got a 3x in 3 years, or 5x in 5 years, our return, blah, 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 right? So they got all these magic numbers. Then they're putting pressure down. Then there's like that pressure comes to the CEO. Then the CEO and the CFO have to have this conversation. Well, we got to get to this number. And then all of a sudden it's like this arbitrary number gets fabricated and it gets dropped down the organization. And everyone has to figure out, where the hell did this come from? How the hell are we going to get there? And we start making up these magic you know, outputs that we've never seen before. What I mean by that is, like, well, then all of a sudden the discussions start going to, well, in order to do that, we are going to increase our close rates by 10%. And in order to do that, we're going to reduce our sales cycles by, you know, 30 days. And in order to do that, we're going to improve our close rate, or like, you know, our average deal size by $10,000. And we just start throwing like these, like sprinkling these like magic fairy dust onto this goal. And it
And they're all
never
fake.
works.
That's
Yeah,
right.
it's all fake.
Yeah.
Like you have to go
Yeah.
back to the realization, like this never has happened in this company before, but we're saying now all of a sudden it's going to work. And how are we going to make it happen? It's madness.
You're
Jake, you
100%
give me some
right.
flashbacks.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
You're giving me some flashbacks, Jake. There was a company I was at where there was this big project. They made this big thing about it, how they're bringing in these consultants and they're going to meet with every team about how we get to this new number.
Love
And
consultants. Yeah.
and I met with this consultant, and he gave me the number, and I said, "Oh, that's a really impressive number. How many more reps do I get to hire?" And they're like, "No more." I'm like, "Well," he's like, "My math says this number is doable." And I said, "Your math's right. It's doable. If my team works 30 days and they take about 3 bathroom breaks for the whole month and don't sleep, we can hit that number. Otherwise, it's mathematically impossible." Because like, I wish it was close rates of 10%. It was like, we're going to increase close rates by like 50%, something ridiculous like that. And that's when I know I probably needed to go do something else.
Like, well, Steve, sounds like you figured it out. Go get it done, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. McKay, you were going to add something there.
Yeah, just the close rate thing is like, that's the one that always makes me laugh the most, because you can increase deal size if you have more products to sell, or if you change like packaging prices or whatever. However, you can manipulate deal size to a point. You can obviously put more stuff in the top of the funnel. You can increase team size, but I have never seen, and I say this like unequivocally, no exaggeration, close rates just magically go up. Like, I've never seen it without like a significant product improvement or new integrations or whatever, right? Like, just changing your marketing mix is rarely, if ever, going to improve close rates. I've never seen it. And just simply saying our reps need to sell better, like that, I've just never seen that. Like, so whenever like the number for a year or a quarter is based on close rate going up, I just like, we're not hitting the number. Like, you just know that. Now, you can't say that to your team, but like as a leader, you just know, like, our close rate has to go up by 8 points, which is a 23% increase. Like, that's not happening. So
right.
You just have to, there's just certain things you start to get used to and see. It's just like, that's not going to happen. But I do think your point about like where the numbers start from is key. I do think there's a potential, and I don't think CEOs would actually dislike this. To your point, Jake, is like, why can't the revenue leaders get in a room and say, here's what we think is a realistic number, and in the middle somewhere is where those numbers end up, right? Like, there's a bottoms up approach that you can initiate, maybe.
It has to happen, I don't know if you guys have ever read the Extreme Ownership book. But one of the things I took away from that book was this realization: as a good leader, we have to create the space for our team and our directs to be able to ask the question why, and we have to also be willing to answer the question why and provide the context so that they can explain that downwards to their team. And if we don't understand where the number comes from and we're not getting the answers to our why, it's really difficult to build belief in the team, right? And so, like, the way like you're proposing, to get it really frank, what the revenue team needs to be doing, marketing, sales, revenue operations need to get together and build a bottoms up forecast. Yeah. Right. And that's the idea here, is that you take a look at what are we actually doing today? What is our actual team's capacity? Dollar for dollar, every dollar we spend in the marketing bucket, in the sales development bucket, and the sales bucket, what is our return? And then analyze all of that and say, okay, if we continue the same way we're at today, here's where we will be in X amount of time. And in order to get to whatever number you're talking about, it's gives and takes, right? And it's, if we want to get there and you give us X amount of dollars, here's the levers we're going to pull based on our current actuals to get there. And then it's having this conversation of, okay, like, this is not an emotional debate. This is a very logical trade, because if we can't give input, we're not getting output. And it's just as simple as that.
Well, imagine too, if you took that bottoms up approach back to your CEO, back to the board, and they're still going to have the numbers that they need to hit to make sure everything makes sense, right? But then you can kind of bring it together and they're like, all right, based off of what we know now from the bottoms up approach, this is where we're going to hit. This is what we think we can do. And they can come back and say, okay, that's not good enough. Okay, fair. So what are we going to change in our process to make that so it can work, right? So we can get to the number that you guys ultimately need us to get to. And the answer is not increase close rates by 50%.
And it could be, but like this is one. Let me just say one thing really quick. This is the critical moment where this is where I love to talk to my founders about. Okay, fair. In order to do this, you're asking to pull 4 levers, right? In order to get righter on this revenue chart, going up and to the right, we first need to get tighter. If we want to change outputs, conversion rates, and all of those, we need to first get the team tighter, which means we need to get consistency across the sales organization and marketing organization to hit the same outputs every single time. Once we get that tighter, we can move righter. But if you're trying to move righter without getting the team tighter, it's going to be all over the place, and you're not going to be understanding what you're measuring. And then if you can't measure it, you can't scale it. So let's pick which levers we're going to invest in, because what it means is investing in enablement. And I promise you cannot run 4 different enablement programs all at the same time to change 4 different outputs all at the same time. So you're going to have to give and take.
Yeah. I'll sing McKay's praises a little bit. He had a gentleman on his team named Derek, who used to run these digital campaigns for my team to follow up on. And one of the things that McKay had Derek do was come down and sit with my team as my team was calling out. And if it was a special day that we're focusing on something, he would set up shop rather than doing marketing in the marketing department. He'd do it down with the sales team, hear the conversations that were being had, there to help coach. And hey, this is actually what this campaign's all about, getting that real-time feedback. And as a result, we were lockstep,
awesome.
working together on responding to the stuff that he'd worked so hard to throw our way. So
but I appreciate you bringing that up, Steve, because that's, I think, really important. And you learn, it's funny, like how myself today would probably argue with myself like 7 or 8 years ago, and like some of these things I'm saying. But like, I'm to the point now where like we have a meeting on Tuesdays with our SDR leaders and our sales leaders here, where we kind of plan the calendar for the upcoming week. We have it every Tuesday. And okay, we're doing this webinar, we're doing this email campaign, here's the trade shows happening. We just know exactly what's going on the following week. And it's to the point now where like, there's no need to have like, everyone should be so aligned that if someone feels super passionately that they don't like something or they do, that, I mean, just not every argument has to end in a victory, like,
right.
Just do what's best for the business. And if someone feels really strongly about something, that's probably enough to do the thing they want to do. Like if there's a certain type of campaign they want to run that they think will work, do it once. There's nothing wrong as a marketer with saying, hey, let's test it. Let's see if it works, and let the data win and see if it worked. But I do think, like, to your point, Steve, there has to be alignment at like the very grassroots level of marketing, SDR, and sales to make sure that we're saying the right things, and on the phone call, the campaigns, and everything else, because that is often, I think, we're too often these things are missed.
So the 2 questions I've got would be one, we're putting, this is the go-to-market team, right? And when I started hearing go-to-market teams or revenue teams, whatever you want to call it, really bringing, that together. Let's let the engineering guys go and do their own thing. But who should be included in those conversations?
Well, I mean, I have an opinion on this, McKay. Yeah. I don't know if you want to jump in there.
No, go ahead, Jake. Go.
Yeah, look, we'll let the engineering guys go off and do their thing, but let's not give up product just yet. Okay, let's keep product over here, because where there's, I think the old approach of like go to market being debated around like, is it run by marketing, is it run by sales? Like we need to pause that thought for a second and realize that today go to market, it needs to be more informed by data and insight than it ever was before. It needs to be a strategic organizational like culture, which means it needs to be owned and orchestrated at the very top level by the CEO. CEO, it starts there. And from there, the team needs to be put together by everyone that impacts and touches the customer. So you've got sales, marketing, product, right? Customer success, all need to be involved in decisions around what are we doing together to go to market together to impact the buyer journey, that we make a critical difference along their whole buying journey from beginning to end, and orchestrate it together so that the handoffs are incredible experiences and the buyer wants to come back and continue to work with us because it is a wonderful experience that we solve it in a meaningful way. So we all need to come together and we all need to work at it together, but it needs to be owned at the C level.
Yeah. Okay, your thoughts?
Look, I've become a huge believer in, especially in early to mid stage companies, product needs to play their role in this as well. So I appreciate Jake bringing that up. Like, the best marketing and sales efforts come from a new feature or a new product that gets people excited, particularly once you have a bunch of customers and you want to upsell to increase NDR and all the other things you want to upsell for. Like, you have to have a product team that's in tune and aware of what's working and what isn't. Like, having members of the product team go to a trade show, having members of the product team listen to demos, like, those are things that really matter. And I think they too often are siloed, because product-led growth is like a more sustainable approach than just throwing headcount of SDRs and reps at something. Like, if you have truly product-led growth, and that's not just saying product-led growth and speaking about features in a different way, to be super clear.
It's not just saying, hey, here's a free demo, go download it and try it out.
It's like, this is a new thing, and this new thing is going to help you in these ways. Like, that discussion, product needs to be in the room for, at the very least.
When I was at Inside Sales, I'll never forget, we had where we were sitting. We were, when I had my business development team in an office, and then up the stairs in this mezzanine of this office is where the developers were that were developing the product that we actually used and sold. And what was really interesting was to have that head of product come down and sit with my business development reps while they're making the calls and using the product and seeing how an end user used it. And so fast forward to here at Signals, two things that we do that's pretty interesting. One, we record all of our demos. And then I will get an email or message from our head of engineering, our head of marketing, saying, hey, can you send over a demo? We've got a meeting. We want to, it's not a critique of how well did your guy do it, but what concerns did your customers have? How can we best resolve that? Maybe what we thought we built is not the way that people want to use it. Let's better understand that. Really coming together and being aligned. And the other thing that we do is we've got a gentleman here by the name of Taylor, who he's our head UX designer. He actually sits with the engineering team helping to build out our actual product, but he spends a good portion of his time actually as part of the CS team as well, listening and working with customers, so he understands, oh, okay, this is how this is working. So what are some best practices you see? And this is the Rev Tech Summit. What are some best practices in terms of using technology and making sure these groups are aligned?
I'll just pick up where you left off on this concept of like listening to calls, right? You're talking about a time when we didn't have all the technology that we have now to actually record calls, to the point now you're making that you actually are recording. It's so amazing that you guys had leaders in other departments that were willing to sit down with sellers and learn and listen and ride shotgun with them, right? But if you're not leveraging in today's world a tool like Gong, Chorus, Fathom, or Attention, which I personally love, like, if you're not using one of the many tools out there, which all have some sort of freemium element to it, you, like, shame on you. Like, I'm just going to call it out. Like, you should at a minimum be able to record and listen to these calls across departments, because there are so many cool ways that you can tag product related items or things related to CS, and people can search through it. There's so many insights you can pull from it. So like, that's one piece. And then I'll just like speaking broadly, I think going back to one of our earlier conversations around getting together in a room and talking about like how we plan together in the buyer journey together. I think the theme here is like the overall alignment and working together to develop the plans for the end goals. That goes also with the tech stack, right? Like if I'm not aligned with my marketing team and I don't know what the MarTech stack is and the RevTech stack is, we're one, I'll promise you, you're probably spending for redundancy on features and functions on a lot of the tools that cross over. And two, you probably are getting a terrible like insight on disparate systems not sharing like data back and forth. But what I'll tell you, like the biggest insight you can get is like if you're working together on thinking about the MarTech and RevTech tech stack as a product for inside the organization and how you can build this product to actually create a better sales and buyer experience, you're going to have a way better outcome, I think, on the sales work.
It's interesting that you're talking about the tech stacks across organizations. I had an SDR once who didn't like the CRM we were on. So he found a free CRM and was just going to use his own CRM. Oof. And what's as silly as that sounds for an SDR just to use his own rogue CRM, does it make any more sense to have tech stacks that are as siloed as that, right?
No.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
I was two thoughts come to mind is 100% with Jake, agree with Jake on the there's so many tools that there are no excuses to not be able to listen to calls, to understand what's going on, to understand precisely how your sales team is messaging. There's just a plethora of tools out there, right? My two thoughts on it are, first, you have to make sure that you're actually utilizing the tech you have. I think this is a huge issue, particularly in maybe mid to large size organizations where people believe a tool will solve a problem when in reality, like it's actually just a process, or you actually don't need to do the thing that you think you need to do to begin with. And so many times at other organizations that are much larger, did we spend money on a MarTech tool that was going to solve all of our issues? And like, it doesn't actually change a process. And so it didn't solve any issues. It just made it harder to navigate the org and made the CFO look at my budget more closely, right? Like, so that's a problem. The other thing I would say too, and this is like I think where many organizations, particularly in marketing, but you could probably say the same thing in other orgs too, is like too much complexity. Not everything has to work for every organization. Like you don't need to have an organization that you spend a ton of money in pay-per-click ads, you have a robust content program, you have webinars, you have a really great trade show program, you do the best world-class ABM. You don't need to do all the things. Find like three things that work and do the three things. And that makes it much easier to track, much easier to attribute, and much easier to manage when you're really good at three things. And I think there's too much focus on like, we got to have all these different lead sources humming at full capacity. It's like, no, you kind of don't. You just need like three things to work really well and have a functional SDR and sales team, and you can actually scale really fast. So simplicity is my plea when we talk tech.
Amen.
It kind of reminds me of the Ron Swanson. The Ron Swanson, never half-ass two things, whole-ass one thing.
That's right.
Right, like you know, let's do fewer things and do it well.
That's right.
Well, gentlemen, that's about time. Anything you guys want to kind of add to finish up?
I'll share one last thought. Like, look, if you're a revenue leader, whether you're marketing, sales, customer success, and you're sitting in a situation where you find yourself like bickering with your counterparts, like just you got to stop that, because that's part of the reason why all of us revenue leaders have an average tenure of 12 to 18 months. Like just like throw that out the window. What we got to do is we've got to pull our counterparts next to us. Like it's your job to pull them next to you, put that problem out in front of us, and then have a conversation of like, how are we going to go get that? And I'll promise you, like, again, winning alone is miserable. You are never, ever, ever going to feel good about yourself if you take that yoke off, look at your counterpart and say, you're going to run on this and you're going to fail. And when you fall face first in the mud, like, I'm going to say, I told you so. I've been there. you will never feel great about watching them fall face first in the mud.
Yep. I love that.
Yeah.
I'll give you 2 tactical things, Steve, quickly here before we conclude. First is every 2 weeks, go to lunch or get on a call with your other revenue leaders, your counterparts, and talk about something other than work for a few minutes of that meeting. Like, just make sure you know that person, because when you don't know someone well, it's really easy to assume poor intentions, particularly in like a remote first environment, which many companies are at today. Second thing is, and I'm serious, try this. In the next meeting you're in with like other revenue leaders that could be counterproductive to be angry at them or whatever, put some of the blame back on yourself. Do that in a few meetings and people start to trust you way more. So if you're in a meeting, if you're the head of sales and you're in the meeting with a marketer and you know something didn't go well the previous month or the previous quarter, just say, yeah, you know what? I had some guys that were out and they weren't that focused when they were in, and we probably didn't do great demos. Or if you're the head of marketing, say, you know what? We probably messed that campaign up. Our pitch was totally wrong. We missed the benefit. We actually didn't execute that trade show well. This webinar was terrible. We emailed to the wrong list. Like, throw some of the blame back on yourself, and I think you'd be surprised how much goodwill that produces. And it also is probably true in most cases, right? Like, so I just think those 2 tactical things, having a great personal relationship with your counterparts and then being really quick to accept blame, goes a long way to keep those relationships, from turning adversarial.
Ownership breeds
Wonderful.
trust. I like that.
Love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, where if people have questions or want to connect with you, where can they find you, Jake?
You find me on LinkedIn and revenue-reimagine.com. Hit us up.
Yeah. McKay?
Yeah, same, LinkedIn or connect.com. You can find us there.
Excellent. Hey guys, I appreciate your time. I know how busy you guys are. Thanks for taking some time to talk to us today, and everybody else, have a great quarter, and we'll see y'all soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.